Welcome to the Therapist Burnout Podcast, episode 31. Hey, therapist, welcome back to the podcast. Dr. Jen Blanchett and I today am joined by Arya Prasad. So, Arya is a psychotherapist and an arts based therapy practitioner. She has worked with a bunch of folks as a school counselor. I worked in schools. I didn't talk about that on our pre-interview, but I think we should get to that because I work in schools currently. But currently, she's working in a private organization in Mumbai. She is joining us from Mumbai, which I'm very excited just to hear about worldwide therapists. Hello. She works with her niche is high performing individuals experiencing anxiety and burnout. We met on LinkedIn and she posts over there. So, hello, Arya. How are you?
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited.
Good. So I usually kick it off to my guests to just share your burnout story. So if you could tell the good listeners a little bit about your burnout and you.
Okay, so I'm a therapist, and I've been working for the past 3 years as a therapist. But my burnout story was when I was in college. So in India, after your bachelor's, you need to do a 2 year master's to be a practicing counseling psychologist. And my master's happened during the pandemic. So 2020, during the pandemic, I was in my second year of master's. And it's a tough course, it's a tough program. And that was just intensified by the pandemic. Now, a bit of backstory is that I've been a high achieving kid since I was 10, as far as I remember, or maybe even longer than that. And I've been the high achieving straight A's kid. Always, I always had high expectations out of myself, never took breaks, the kind. And what happened was that really worked for me until it didn't. So it really worked to help me get into a good college, a good program. It helped me achieve goals after goals. When the pandemic began and when the world practically shut, I was home, and Mumbai homes are tiny, so there wasn't a lot of space. We didn't know what was happening with our programs, and we did not know what was happening with the world around us. And there was this intense, constant state of anxiety. So in March 2020, I had intense chest aches, and my first chest ache felt like a heart attack because, again, I had no
So you had
idea.
you had chest tightness, like chest ache. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And right where my heart is at. So it actually
Okay.
felt like a heart attack right up to my left shoulder. And I was freaking out. Right. And this happened for a consistent month. And my mom pushed me to get into yoga. Yoga is a huge thing in India, of course, but I just went for it. But I did not know that my anxiety had burnout coming after. So we're talking about our academic programs at a standstill. Professors have no idea what's going on. Institutions have no idea what's going on. We're super scared because this time next year we're supposed to be getting jobs. Right.
Mhm.
And we're really scared. We've all worked really hard up till now and we have no idea what to do. Just the world around us, right? And it doesn't help having insane expectations out of yourself. I was expecting myself to be at my best self during the pandemic. So no friends, no social life. We have no idea what's going on. And I still wanted to be the straight A's kid. And that took a toll on me, very honestly, because it took over my entire life. By August 2020, I was in the middle of my burnout. So it looked like me waking up, crying in bed for an hour. Then I just dragged myself out of the bed and just forced myself to sit in front of the laptop, but I couldn't process anything. Like I'm staring at an empty Word doc because brain fog. I no ambition left. And coming from a person who's prided herself on her ambition, I have none of that left. And it was just really scary to see myself be that way because I've never been that before. I've never been cranky. I've never been this lethargic. I had no energy. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was just in the corner of my house. My mom had to beg me to talk to her, right? And I remember this one time where I just shut the door. I was angry, I was crying. My mom freaked out so hard that she called up my best friend. And mind you, my mom's in the other room. She calls up my best friend, who's like 40 kilometers away, to call me up and talk to me. And she's that scared. There was this one point where she thought that it was a really bad idea to enroll me in my master's program. My grandparents are married. They don't live with us, but they were super worried looking at me because, my face had gone all gaunt. Like you could see dark circles. I barely smiled. And you know what? I have to add this one thing. I think at least half my class was going through a burnout phase the same time I was. So clearly, I wasn't alone. It was very clearly a systemic thing that was happening, not just an individual thing. So, yeah, that was how burnout began. And that's how it showed up as really ugly. Honestly, I didn't have the energy to do anything, let alone finish assignments. I didn't have the energy to take a bath on most days. Anxiety intensified, my feeling of helplessness intensified. So, it was just a very dark time of my life. And it really affects how I view the world as a therapist and as a person right now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I mean, I think there's so much, in that I was like, "Oh, I have a question on that and this and that." But maybe I want to start with just asking you about kind of how a lot of us therapists, I think we're like straight A students, we're high achieving people.
Yeah.
We have made all the good grades and actually do the work of therapy.
Yeah.
It's not about getting it perfect or getting it right. It's about being with someone else. It's about like, yes, we have our training, we have our knowledge. That is important 100%. But it's not about like, I got an A today with that client. And I think we all have to have a reckoning with that, you know?
That hit me so hard when I got into my first job. Not as much in my master's, because in my master's, we have this internship, this fieldwork component that's compulsory for us. It wasn't as much there, but when my first job came around, I expected myself to get it right every single session. So my first job was working as a school counselor, the best job ever. I loved it. As much as I loved it, it was also very challenging. And I worked with children at risk. So children who, the school where I worked, there was a slum around it. So a lot of those kids belong to the slum. And we're talking about kids who experienced everything that you can think of. Domestic violence, bullying, just not having water and a consistent shelter over their heads, right? So imagine the amount of trauma that just
Yeah.
one child holds. And I'm here expecting that I'm going to get it right all the time. That didn't happen. Of course it didn't. And I remember this one thing that my supervisor told me that still stays with me today. She looks at me in the eye and she goes, Arya, are you looking for a report card from me?
Oh,
Just like, you didn't have to call me out like, but that was what I was doing. I was looking for a report card validation with every single client, with every single session. Did it go right?
yeah.
Check. Was I at my best self? Check. Do others see the students' progress just like I do? Check.
Right.
Clearly, we didn't meet those checks every single session, but I think it's really different when you come in a therapy space having the traits that high achievers often do, wanting control, right? It's so hard to just give up control. It's so hard to go with the flow because what is that? We're not used to it. It's so hard to have a set expectation out of yourself and not have that materialize in therapy. So I worked with kids, and we know how kids are. If they don't want to do something, they will not do it. If they don't want to talk, they will not talk. And I've had moments where I'm tearing my hair out because why won't this child talk to me? I'm nice. Talk to me. And I've had all of those moments. It's been incredibly difficult letting go of that part of myself that wants to do it all and that wants to do it all well. But I think it's been incredibly rewarding and honestly very humbling because over time, I've realized that the essence of therapy wasn't to get it right. Most of it was just to be with my client, just meeting them where I'm at. You
Yeah.
can't do that with a checklist in your mind because the moment you're referring to your notes, your checklist, your to do list for a session, you automatically lose touch with being with the client, which is what they need,
Yeah.
right?
Especially I can't imagine like, what you're describing, like children at that school who don't have running water, they don't have a roof over their head. They've probably seen and witnessed horrific trauma throughout their lives, maybe have a loss of a caregiver. So if we think of that ACEs score,
Yeah,
the ACEs adult, it's pretty high for each one of those kiddos,
it
and
is.
I think it's so hard, especially I always say this, like, our younger therapist, we and myself included, when I was a younger therapist, our first jobs are with some of the most highly acute clients that have the most trauma, that have the most difficulties, and it's no wonder, that we burn out of these situations because we are essentially walking through fire with them.
You know, I was almost there. So I worked in that place for 2 years. I loved every moment of it, but it just didn't feel it didn't feel like I was going in the direction I wanted to go. So as a school counselor, it was never just restricted to one-on-one therapy sessions. In India, school counselors do a lot of other things. And I worked in an NGO. The school
And
was
what's that?
was the NGO is a non-governmental organization.
Okay.
And so it's a not-for-profit center.
Okay,
And
so
the
gotcha.
organization, yeah, they tied up with the school. So that's why I was in the school working as a school counselor. So I worked as somebody who would help out with learning disabilities. So I would help diagnose children with learning disabilities in the sense that I would send them to a government hospital and ask them to get their tests done so that it would help them in their academics. I would go across classes and understand if teachers needed more support with respect to students' mental health. I worked with social emotional learning for students. I was also working as a first respondent in classes and in schools, in the sense that if there was any emergency in the community I worked with, me and a social worker would attend to that. Right. So it's not just one-on-one therapy that was getting
Yeah.
tiring, but it was, in fact, one-on-one therapy was very enriching for me and I wanted to do more of it. But I had all of these other roles. And I just didn't have the bandwidth to do all of them and be a good therapist. And after my second year, when my second year ended, I knew I had to leave because I still had a lot of love and care for that place. I didn't want another burnout to kick in, which would lead to resentment.
Hmm.
So I knew the smart thing to do was to leave. And I cried when I submitted my resignation papers. I didn't want to do it, but I knew that if I wanted to stay in the field, I had to find a place that was more sustainable for me as a mental health practitioner. Otherwise, I was out.
100% makes sense. Like it sounds like the expectations that that place required of you would you saw the writing on the wall. If I do this for another year, I'll burn out. And then
Mhm,
I'm out of this field. There's no way I can be a therapist or be in my career anymore.
mhm.
100% makes sense to me. Percent. And I think a lot of us make those choices. We just kind of like, I can't do this. That was my story too. I can't do this job. So I'm going to go to over here. And I kept passing the buck until in burnout kept finding me. I'm wondering, like going back to like where you first experienced burnout in your program, were you like in field placements at that time? Was that part of it or was okay. So tell me a little bit about that. Like what were like the circumstances that were at play there?
So because again, the pandemic, we were supposed to have in-field placements, but that didn't happen. So we had to go all online. I was working as an intern with a government hospital in Mumbai, and it was a pediatric psychiatric clinic. So I was working with children who were diagnosed with ADHD, who were diagnosed with autism, and their caregivers. All of this happened online. And I think that was so difficult to deal with now that I'm thinking back on it because one, I was expected to show up and support children and their parents who already had a very difficult time. Second, the coursework was huge. So in India, we have dissertations. The second year of masters is usually when we really need to zone in on our dissertations. And I had to change my dissertation topic, which is a separate story. So there was, and I am really bad at research, or at least I was then. So there's that added
You
element of
completed it.
just,
You got it.
yeah,
A done dissertation is a great one. That's what
yeah.
one of my mentors told me. As
I
someone who did a
actually,
thesis and a dissertation, like,
so, just being expected to be a student and to be a trainee, and then having a
mm,
set of expectations of my own and trying to keep a social life at the same time while the world is practically burning is not the
yeah,
best time to be a therapist, right? Because there is no security, there's no stability, and we need some of it so that we can offer some to our clients. I don't know how ethical it is for me to say this, but there will be days where I just cry at like 7 a.m., 8 a.m., and then get up and do a therapy session at, say, noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon because I was expected to do so. I just
yeah.
had to compartmentalize and shut that part of my life and keep it aside just so that I could be there for my clients. I really hope things change for students soon because we deserve supportive systems. Like my professors were amazing. They
Mm,
did the best they could, right? They really supported us, they really empathized with us, they really guided us. But I think individuals can only do so much, right?
100%.
I really needed systems to take stock of the fact that, okay, hey, is cramming the amount of syllabus necessary? Do we still need assignments? Do we still need to do a dissertation with all of these things during this time? And a lot of people say, Tasri, I agree. It made us better practitioners, but it really came at the cost of our mental health. I
Yeah.
know for a fact that I'm a better practitioner because I had those fieldwork experiences, because I studied the courses that I studied. But my masters were so bad that when I was done, video called my grandma and she saw me smiling for like the first time in forever. And she's like, "You're smiling? Don't change that. Like, please stick to it because I haven't seen it in a very long time." And I think students deserve better than
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I'm just curious about, like, what were those well, let me go back because 'cause I'm just
that.
sitting, like, I feel the emotion, like, right now in myself, and I see it with you. What's coming up right now as you say that?
I think when I talk about burnout, right, I just feel this amount of injustice at the world around us.
Mhm.
We're not supposed to go through all of this that we do, right? And I badly want a just world where where we have enough resources, we have universal health care, we have reasonable and sustainable systems around us. And every single time I think about my story with burnout and my colleague's story with burnout, my professor's story with burnout, I just feel that everybody is being failed by systems multiple times. Like the systems are failing us day in and day out, which is why we reach the space that we are in right now. Like, I'm seeing so many therapists just be overburdened by the amount of clients they're seeing per week and they're being paid pennies for it. I can't do a INR to USD conversion right away, but they're being paid INR 300 per session, which is, I can't do the math, $5, six for one
5
session.
like, equivalent of $5 US?
I think so. I can do the math. I need a second
Yeah,
for it.
I can get a converter, like a currency converter to understand, like, how little that is in your like, where in India, like, what
Okay.
that would translate to.
So I got one, right? And there are organizations that provide clients to therapists, right? And some of them pay as little as INR 300, which is not even $4 per session.
Wow. Oh, I'm shaking my head.
Yeah. And the worst part is, especially new therapists, they end up taking it up because they don't have an option. Like, you're not going to have a ready-made client right after you step out of MA. You're going to take some time to establish yourself. You're going to take some
Right.
time to figure out what kind of modalities you want to use in your spaces. We take time. And they're being paid $4, maybe $10. $10 is
Yeah.
like a nicer figure for India. Um, and then we wonder why our therapist is burning out. Like, no shit.
Yes. It makes 100% sense. And when other professions, I talk about this a lot, like people with our level of education. So if
Uh-huh.
they went and got their master's degree in like business or marketing, what is the equivalent salary there those people are making in your country, do you think, would you say?
I'm so involved in the field of mental health that I've almost forgotten about everybody else in the world, but
Sure. I'm
they're
blocking all of
making,
those people out. Like, I only care about us. I love it.
I think they should be making a minimum of 20,000 INR more than what a beginner psychotherapist makes. 20,000 is, give me a second. The
Yeah,
conversion is insane.
yeah, I love talking money. You can stay here all day.
So the conversion is, again, in USD, it sounds really little, but at least $250 more per month. It's just at a basic level. And I could be
Yeah,
completely
so
wrong
maybe,
about
like,
this.
twice more? Like, they might make twice as much as a
Yes.
therapist might make in India or
Yes.
something like that? Okay.
At a minimum.
Mhm. At a
Right.
minimum, okay.
And I know somebody who got paid my salary with a bachelor's degree, which is with 5 years of lesser experience than me. So I've got another degree in, I've got 3 years of work experience, and he got paid the same amount right out of bachelor's, like right out of undergrad. And then they wonder why we're burnt out. See, it makes me so mad. I fumble.
And yeah, I sometimes yeah, I was just angry this morning when I was posting too. For other reasons why, sometimes I feel like people will kind of wonder if they're not in this field, like, "What you went into this, shouldn't you be able to manage it?" Like, I just don't think if you're in our field, you can kind of really understand, like, really what it takes to do this work. Yeah, I'm gonna go back a little bit to what you were talking about school and, like, this, need to feel like we need to know everything. And I think that shows up a lot of us in our training because, we have our supervisor perhaps like over our shoulder or we're showing them I don't know if you showed tape and you had to show tape in school of yourself doing therapy with your client. No, you didn't.
No, wait.
I had my therapist we had like a window, right?
Oh,
And my supervisor would be behind like the mirror, like looking at me
mhm.
doing therapy, or I have to show tape of like the worst part of my session. And so there is this performative thing where
Uh-huh.
you feel like I'm going to get caught as the imposter. I'm doing it wrong.
I swear to God, that still happens. I want to tell you that I'm over it. I'm not. Also, if I ever had to show my supervisor my tapes, I'd die of embarrassment. I think I'd drop
Mhm.
out of the program because that feeling of, hey, am I going right? Did I make something wrong? Just the shame, the guilt when I'm not able to pick up something the clients say, when I make a mistake. And then therapy is like 100 micro decisions in an hour, right? Do I pick up on this? Do I point that out? What do I say
Mhm.
next? Something can always go wrong, right? And I specified the air quotes because we have a template of therapy going right in our head, and therapy is not going to follow that. So the imposter syndrome is insane. I was ranting to my supervisor in my college, and I'm almost in the verge of tears. And I'm telling you, I can't believe I haven't gotten this right. When am I gonna know it all? She's like, Arya, I've been working for 20 years. I still don't think we know it all. I'm just like, that's rude. I want to know it all. I would
Yeah.
really love it if somebody could just give me a handbook and be like, "Oh, this is what you need to do." The
Yeah.
imposter syndrome kicks in so hard, despite the fact that you're doing your best, despite the fact that you're giving it your all.
Why do you think and this is not unique to you.
Mm,
So, I think for everyone listening, Why do you think that shows up for therapists?
No, one therapist. So in India, right, therapists are the last professionals to be approached when it comes to mental health. Doctors will be approached.
So you would go, like, if you were depressed or whatever, you would go to
Yeah.
your doctor before you go to a therapist?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
We'd go to a doctor, we'll go to so India has this thing of family doctors. Doctors who've known you since you were a child, doctors who've known your parents or your grandparents as well. Because we're a collectivist society. So we go to family doctors. We are heavy on religion or spirituality. So we look out for priests, we look out for religious leaders. We have we have I don't know what to call them. Saints. I don't know what to call them. They're called Babas in India. It
Uh-huh.
means it's like a somebody who guides you on spirituality. Think of it like a guide or a mentor, but for spiritual
Okay, yeah.
purposes. And a lot of them also help you out with medicine. We have a lot of that in the country. For mental health, we will be approached last. I've never had a client come to me and be like, oh yeah, I had symptoms of depression when I thought of approaching you. But I did this, I did that, I did this, and now I'm here.
So they probably are holding a lot of shame when they come to you, I would think.
As therapists, a lot of us have this tendency to fix. And when we try so hard to fix something that people haven't been able to fix before, I can
Yeah.
see why that makes us feel like imposters. We shouldn't have to fix. That's not our jobs, right?
Right.
But we're in a system that encourages perfection. We're in a system that encourages extreme amounts of productivity, that values work over our health. So we feel the need to fix. And when we're talking about something that's as variable as mental health, we're not going to be able to fix it. So, add the layer of being a therapist, and add the layer of being a high achiever, then add the layer of being in a country where the stigma is so high that you're not able to break through the taboos of mental health. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And that your services aren't valued in your society, right? So,
Yeah.
like, we have that financial layer, and I think that's for, like, probably across the world for therapists. I think it's changing in some places for sure, thankfully. But in India, like you're saying, if we're the last stop, and that last stop is like, ooh, like you're here now, and then that service isn't valued by society. That's
I have to
hard.
add this one more thing, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned the hierarchy, right? And then among healthcare professionals, we're not even seen as healthcare professionals. Like there will
Okay.
always be this psychiatrist versus psychologist, the debate between psychiatrists and psychologists. In India, it's always understood that psychiatrists will have a higher ground, a higher value than psychologists. And even in India, there are different psychologists, right? There are clinical psychologists who can engage in testing, psychometric testing, and there are counseling
Right.
psychologists, right? And for clinical psychologists, they need to have an additional degree, an MPhil degree. Again, there's that hierarchy.
What is it?
And
The degree?
MPhil,
MPhil?
yes, Masters of
Oh, okay.
Philosophy in
Oh, okay.
psychology, in clinical psychology. Yeah.
Gotcha. I'm clinical psychologist by training, so I'm just interested because it's my licensure. I'm like, what are they doing? That's
Yeah.
interesting to know. Yeah. So I'm hearing like there's and I think somewhat in the US too, because psychiatrists are an MD, and they don't really touch therapy though. So I think some do. I shouldn't say that because some do. Like Irvin Yalom, is a psychiatrist,
Yeah.
and he talks a lot about therapy. But I think that was probably the old guard, like where psychiatrists still did some therapy. But I think there is somewhat of that hierarchy that still comes into play, and it
Oh,
sounds
for
like
sure.
where you are, it's huge. Like it's very much like this is where you go first, and then we'll
Yeah.
refer you down to a
Yeah.
therapist when we know the long-term benefits is that actually psychotherapy is better if we're
Yeah.
looking at long-term effects, right?
Absolutely.
So it seems like gaslight.
I know that clients need medications, right? But I'm so
Of
tired of having
course.
to justify therapy as a worthwhile investment of time and effort and money. Because I've got people outright telling me that you're charging too much, and what's the use? We're just gonna sit and talk anyway. Why do you even? I can't. And just having to justify what you're doing. And earlier, right? Now I've got a bit of experience, but earlier it was so hard because I almost believed it. We're just sitting and talking. Will this even bring about any change? And now we're
Uh,
working with clients consistently. So it doesn't get to me as much. And I'm also able to distance myself from those comments. Like those comments are the reflection of their values and their knowledge and their skills, not of mine. But when
is
you're
that coming from
Mhm.
clients or coming from, like, your family or people you know or, like
Everybody,
okay.
apart from my clients who've been consistently with me for the longest time, oh my god. So there are a lot of people who I have to refer out because they can't exceed their budgets and I'm out of their budget. Right? Again,
Right.
that's completely okay. You're allowed to have your budget for mental health. And again, in
100%.
India, absolutely, right? India, mental health is a very new concept. People can't afford it. The government has no allowances for it. Insurances have no allowances for it. And so it's absolutely out of your own pocket. So I get why
So
people
no one has, like, insurance or government does not sponsor any type of therapy in India at all?
um so in government hospitals. So if you go to
Okay.
government hospitals, there are psychologists there. But again, that's one psychologist or maybe two, three. I haven't heard of hospitals having more than two or three psychologists at max. And the amount of people that come to a psychologist is huge.
Yeah, and they're
They have
probably
their
just,
own
doing an evaluation, diagnosis, and, like, here's a couple strategies, like,
exactly,
hope that's helpful. Which
absolutely
is
right.
good. I mean, we need that. We need, like, the assessment and, like, crisis work, but it's very different from ongoing therapy, right?
Absolutely. And one more thing, right? For India, if you have to go to a government hospital, if you're, for example, if you're a manual laborer, if you work in construction, for example, you have to take
Mhm.
a day off to come to a hospital, which means you lose out on the pay. You're not going to come to a therapy session every week and lose out on a day's pay. It's not
Right.
feasible. So they drop out. We do have NGOs, non governmental organizations that do sponsor therapy sessions. But again, population is insane. The volume is just too much.
Well, that's what you said you were doing, like, as a student, like, you were required to work in the NGO. I'm just curious, how many clients were you supposed to hold as a student per week? Or, like, how many sessions were you required to do?
I wasn't in the NGO as a student. I was in the NGO. That was my first job. So as
Oh,
a
that's, like,
student,
school or okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
the school that's the NGO was right after my master's. That was my first
Gotcha.
job. I honestly don't remember. As a student, it was far less. They were very considerate of our capacity. It wasn't as much. Maybe I want to say 8 clients per week. I don't think
Okay,
it was that
yeah.
much. I don't remember a lot of it. But as a student, that was the case. But when I began working in the NGO, in the school setting that I was placed at, my school had 450 students, and I was the only mental health professional in the school.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. I loved the school, but oh my god, I was on my foot the entire time, on my feet the entire time.
Yeah, just crisis, like, trying to put out fires probably, I would imagine,
Yeah.
with crisis to the next crisis. Hmm.
If it was in some mental health crisis, it would have been something administrative. If it wasn't that, then maybe I would just scramble to find some time to get therapy sessions in, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of that.
So, kind of like, let's fast forward in time a little bit. So now are you working in like a private practice with of your own practice now?
Working with an organization. It's a tiny organization. It functions like a group practice, but it's we just call it a private organization. Yeah, it's I chose this organization with a lot of intent because I liked the the team, I liked the work culture, and I really liked their efforts for sustainability. I'm expected to see around 20 clients per week, and I can modify my own schedule, which is amazing. it really helps to have a life outside of work because of that modification. I've got supervisors who are considerate of my own mental health. So I'm in a much better space right now as a therapist. And I'm really glad because I've completed over a year in the organization. And just having the space to focus on therapy without other things coming in, without having to deal with fires, without having to deal with other tasks that only mental health professionals can do. I can just zone into therapy without having to worry about anything else. And that's been really refreshing for me.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I'm just curious, like, thinking of a therapist who might be in the midst of a burnout recovery, like, and they need some support. What things did you do to help yourself through that situation? What were kind of the pieces that helped you get through burnout?
Please get a therapist.
Yeah.
Please get a therapist. I've been with my therapist for over 3.5 years. And when I tell you that woman helped me save my life, I'm not joking. I needed a resourceful therapist who could be there for me. And I think that's the best thing I've done. That's easily the best investment of my money and my time.
Yes.
Can't emphasize on this anymore, but yeah. I think as a high achiever, I know it's difficult to ask for help, but that's one of the smartest things to do. And when I say ask for help, it's all hands on deck. My mom and my grandparents, they were phenomenal in helping me get through my burnout. They knew that I have this tendency to want to be the best, to get everything done. And they were like, just focus on finishing your program. We will figure everything else out later, but just get yourself through this. Do the bare minimum that you have to, but get yourself through this. I had to rely on my friends a lot. I remember this one day where I was on the verge of tears and my friend was just helping me through my dissertation because I couldn't understand a single word. There was so much of brain fog that I couldn't read a sentence without confusing myself. And this is really strange for me because I get things really quickly. That's how I
Yeah.
function as a high achiever. And this is like, are my brain cells alive? Am I okay?
Yeah. I think you're not alone in that. So I am a brain injury specialist as well. I came from a neuro rehab background. And so I worked with people with concussion and brain injuries, and I did this whole like episode on check it. I don't know which one it is, but I did an episode on neurocognitive changes associated with burnout.
Yeah.
Like it is real. So it is completely real that we are dealing with some cognitive difficulties as a result of burnout because essentially we have to think what our body is doing to help protect us. So we have put ourselves into chronic burnout and chronic fatigue. So our body is basically like doing a dorsal vagal shutdown. It is like we are shutting down the inputs and you're not reading anymore because we are done. You've put us through too much. So I think it's largely like to think of like your body is trying to protect you. It is not your fault that your body wants to do that. Just a little aside. Sorry.
No, but that's helpful, right? Because anything to reduce the blame that we feel, anything to reduce the
Of
guilt that
course.
we feel for not being able to do what we're supposed to do, which kind of brings me to my next point, which is reduce your expectations. We're not supposed to be having so many identities up and running at every single time without breaks. Do the bare minimum. And I know this comes from a place of privilege because a lot of people can't afford to do the bare minimum.
Right.
If you have to work, you have to work. But do the bare minimum that you can. I really think my burnout forced me to look at what I was expecting out of myself and really assess if I needed that in my life or not. For example, an employer isn't going to hire me just because I scored 10 marks more in an assignment. They're going to hire me because of what I bring to the table, of who I am as a person, of how competent I am as a therapist. Why am I waiting for first place? This is no medal of honor.
Yeah, it's so interesting, like, being licensed, post like 10 years now. And,
Yeah.
when my burnout hit, I closed my practice and I
Uh,
applied to some jobs and like no one asked for my transcript. So no one knows like my grade point average. They wanted to know, are you a licensed professional? What is your experience? And then what do you like to talk to? Like, how are you as a person? How is it
Absolutely.
nice to talk to you? Do you seem like you would fit into our culture, right? It's not about the grades. It's not about our resumes.
I wish I had believed that when I was in my master's, because it was so hard to let go of that. And my burnout was just like, nope, that's not happening.
I
But
really like those recommendations, like, so let go of those expectations. I often tell people, like, we need to figure out what you need to let go of first
yeah,
before you can think of what you're going to move to. So
absolutely.
that's kind of falls right into that with knowing that, getting a therapist, asking for help. That was also like part of my mix too. Like, I still see my therapist. She's shout out, you know who you are. If you listen to my podcast, I don't know, I told her to show to my podcast. And I'm like, I won't name you or anything, but you're awesome. So yeah, all of the therapists of therapists, you're awesome. Thank you
Oh
for
my God.
supporting our work because it's a trickle down. Like, all these ripples are going through the therapy world. So I think it's beautiful. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up today. I can't believe it. It's just been so fun talking to you. But I usually, and this might be a time to talk about
Yes,
play.
I'm
Go,
so
yes,
sorry. I'm so
jump in,
sorry.
jump in,
One last thing.
jump in.
All you high achiever therapists, I need you to not read up on productivity. Please do not go deep into productivity Reddit and figure out how to improve your performance at this time. Burnout does not mean that you're supposed to push harder. That's it.
Yeah. So ditch productivity. It's not for you in burnout.
It's not. No.
I always tell people, like, how are you going to find some ease in your day? How can it be easier today for you? That's what we need. If we're burnout, I want you to answer that question.
So when I was bang in the middle of burnout, I had this I had this series called 100 Days of Something Nice. And every day I would take a picture or a video of something nice that was happening around me. Again, we're in the middle of the pandemic, there's not a lot going on. Things for me that was something nice for me included a good cup of tea, a conversation with my mom, maybe something I doodled, something funny that I saw, right? And I would post those photos on my personal Instagram every single day. It
That's
was
great.
just about finding those little moments in your day that was worth savoring, experimenting a little, just being curious, leaning into what's happening, what's working for you. So I knew in a day, if I could figure out one thing that was working for me, that was it. That meant the day was productive. I had achieved everything I needed to achieve, and everything else was a bonus. And
Yes. I love that.
myself out of a burnout through those systems, through
Hmm.
those projects that I had for myself. Bare minimum, easy, and most importantly, something fun and playful.
Yeah. I love it. So, my last question is, how are you finding joy today?
Things I like. Of unlearning everything I've learned was to let go of things that don't serve me. And that's really hard because I want it all. I want to do it all. I want to figure it all out. I'm focusing my energy on things that work for me and things that really align with what I'm doing, which is being a therapist, teaching in a college, writing on LinkedIn, right? And I want a life apart from work, and that's my biggest source of joy. I go to the gym, and that's a lot of fun. Sometimes I suck at it, but that's okay. I make really amazing cups of tea. I add ginger, I add lemongrass, and Indian
Mm,
chai is different, and it's amazing.
it sounds amazing.
Oh my god! If I could make a cup for everybody in the world, I would.
I think that could be a therapy, like, I will make you the best cup of Indian chai you've ever had, and we're just going to have it and like savor it. And that's the whole therapy.
Yes, I'm gonna do that. Actually, now that you told me about it,
That's a whole intervention. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
that's great.
I do things that are
Awesome.
fun. So
Well, where can people find you if they want to reach out and talk with you about your story and about what's going on with you in your world?
LinkedIn, I'm predominantly on LinkedIn, and you can find me as Arya Prasad. I can send a link across if that's easy for you.
Yeah, I'll put a link in our show notes so that people
Okay.
could find you there and follow you, and I love the conversations we've had on there. They've been
Mhm.
great, and I love what you're putting out into the world. So, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm sure that people are gonna get so much out of this.
Thank you, Jen. This is really, really fun for me.
Thank you for listening to the Joy After Burnout podcast. Be the first to hear new episodes by following the podcast in your podcast player. This is an informational podcast only. Any information expressed by the host or guest is not a substitute for legal, medical, or financial advice.